What is time? And what is past time? In particular, how do we express concepts of past time that we aren't even aware of normally? Today we're going to start talking about the past. We won't do everything in today's class though. I'm going to divide it up into smaller sections which are easier to consider individually. So we'll start today by looking at the past simple, then the past continuous, and then used to for the past, as well as would for the past. Let's start with an insight about the past simple. Are you ready? You can't use the present perfect instead of the past simple. I know that in German, the equivalent of the present perfect is used for the past, not in English. Let's look at a couple of examples. One of the main functions of the past simple is to describe a completed past action. Yesterday is in the past. So we'd say Greg ate a pie yesterday. It's a completed past action. Other expressions used in the same way as yesterday could include, for instance, last week, last year, 10 years ago, when he was 15. So Greg ate a pie when he was 15. The second sentence here is not possible. This is German style. I'm not going to talk about the present perfect in any detail today, as that's coming next week. The one exception is if we said this morning instead of yesterday. And then we do have a choice of two options. We can say Greg ate a pie this morning. If we think of this morning as being separate to where we are now. For example, we might say this in the evening. But let's say it's the early afternoon, for example. If you still feel that there's a close connection to this morning, you could say Greg has eaten a pie this morning. Because this morning doesn't feel as if it's over. But I'm not going to say anything more about that right now. For the purposes of today, we need to know that if it's for a completed past action, it has to be the past simple. We form the past continuous with the verb to be in the past simple, was or were, and the present participle, the ing form. Let's look at three uses. It was late in the evening was turning dark, or was becoming dark. This is background information. The second sentence, I was having a bath when the phone rang. So if we think of the order of events, first of all I started to have a bath, and I was in the process of having a bath when ring, 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 the phone rang. This is an interrupted past action. You could also say I was having a bath while the phone was ringing, and then two things would be happening at the same time, and that's what we have in the third example, sorry. It was raining the whole time we were jogging in the park. So this is two simultaneous, unfinished past actions. Next we have used to for the past. First I need to distinguish it from used to as in I'm accustomed to. So I've written on the first line, not this, I'm used to waiting for trains. That's got nothing to do with the past. That's a different form of used to. It's followed by the gerund, I'm used to waiting for trains. And that just means it is normal for me to wait for trains. So you might say, David, are you used to our strange German habits yet? To which I might say, yes, I'm used to them. Or, no, I'll never get used to some of them. Okay. Anyway, that's not what this is about. Instead, we have used to describe states in the past that have changed. So, Mary used to live in Loughborough. She doesn't live there now. She used to live in Loughborough. And it can also be used for repeated actions in the past that no longer happen. Christopher used to visit Mary most weekends while she was living in Loughborough. Okay. We wouldn't say this with a number. We wouldn't say Christopher used to visit Mary 5 times. No, then we would use the past simple. Christopher visited Mary 5 times. We actually use used to both for changed states and repeated actions that no longer exist. We use this form quite a lot. Can you hear the difference between Mary used to smoke and Mary smoked? When you say Mary used to smoke, you don't even need to say when or whatever. But if you say Mary smoked, that doesn't make any sense just by itself. It's like, what? When? You need a time expression. Our fourth and final explanation of the day is about the use of would for the past. This has one of the uses of used to, as we will see. But would is more literary language, or it can be used stylistically when telling a story. And it can especially be used when speaking with nostalgia about the good old days. Okay, so first of all, how do we not use it? Well, we wouldn't say Judy would live in Leicester. That doesn't mean anything. It sounds as if you're trying to say Judy would like to live in Leicester. No, in this instance we have to say Judy used to live in Leicester. And so that's about a past state which no longer exists. However, we can use it for repeated actions in the past that no longer exist. And remember, often it's about, when you were a child or when you were younger, and there's nostalgia. So we have my example. As children, Judy and her friends would race each other down to the river, where they would wade into the cold water on a hot summer's day and dream of what the future would bring. Notice the last use there of what the future would bring. That's not this kind of would. But we do have Judy and her friends would race each other and they would wade into the water. There we could also say they used to race each other and they used to wade into the cold water. But if we're being all poetical, whichever, then then we can use would in this way. Poetical. Please pause the video now so that you can reconsider the answers that you have written on StudIP, and then we will go through the exercises in 3, 2, 1. Jimmy used to eat meat, but he doesn't anymore. We can't say Jimmy ate meat here because we don't know when. And we can't say Jimmy has eaten meat. And we'll talk about that next week. Basically, this is something which no longer happens, but he used to eat meat. Number 2, Fiona and Timothy were swimming in the sea when they heard the shark warning siren. So first of all, they started to swim in the sea, and then they were still swimming there when they heard the siren. If this was a real exam question, I would actually have to add something else to this. So I'd have to say, when they heard the shark warning siren, and then they decided to get out of the sea as fast as possible. Because at the moment, without that addition, there are a couple of other options which would be possible here. You could also have Fiona and Timothy had been swimming in the sea, or had swum in the sea. In these two cases, they're not actually in the sea at the time. This is why it takes me so long to design the exam, because I have to be so precise with the questions if I want to limit the choice of answers. 3. What I saw was that first the plane landed, and then the passengers were allowed to get off it, and then the passengers got off it. We use the past simple to show that events happened in a certain order. So the plane landed and then they got off the plane. 4. He somehow caught the basketball while he was looking in the opposite direction. Note that if there is another word in brackets and not just the verb, in this case somehow, you have to include that in the answer, and it has to be in the right order. So you can't say he caught somehow the basketball. It has to be he somehow caught the basketball. One word which often appears in brackets is the word not. Notice also that I've spelt the word caught correctly. You have to spell these words right. Number 1, A, B, C are all correct. They're all fine grammatically. They used to live in France, but they don't anymore. They lived in France. Maybe these people are dead, and so it's definitely a completed action. They have lived in France at some stage in their lives. We'll talk more about that next week. Number 2, only A and B are possible. It was raining here 2 days ago, so we're talking about a process over a period of time, but it did finish in the past as well. It rained here 2 days ago. Obviously, that's the same, that's a completed past action. This is just with a focus on the result, whereas in A, we have a focus on the process of it raining. C isn't possible. You know, you might hear someone say, it has rained here. That's fine. We'll talk about that next week. And in normal speech, people often pause and then add a period of time which they wouldn't do if they were writing. So it has rained here 2 days ago, then that's, if you think of the grammar of spoken language, that can occur. But it's not seen as being proper grammar as such, and on this course it's definitely wrong. One, incorrect. We got married 2 weeks after we met each other. That's a time in the past, not connected to now. Number 2, correct. Number 3, incorrect. Did you speak to Sam last Wednesday? That's a time in the past, not connected to now. Without last Wednesday, you can say, have you spoken to Sam? We'll talk about that next week. Number 4, incorrect. I emailed you on Monday, completed past action. Okay, see you next week for the perfect.